and it's going to topple the central bank empire. The central banks around the world, I predict, one of my predictions will be one of the major central banks in the world will collapse in 2021. They're highly leveraged. As your guest, Jim Rickards, points out many times, these banks are leveraged 50, 60, 70 to 1. They're leveraged more than long-term capital management was when long-term capital management was at its highest point of leverage. So Rickards would know about this stuff. And one of them is going to collapse in 2021, and that will start an avalanche out of fiat money and paper money. And the top beneficiary of that will be Bitcoin. That's one of the catalysts for a price appreciation in 2021. But my point is this, Daniela, Bitcoin is a protest against fiat money, central banks, authoritarianism. And the way the protest works is the cypherpunks and everyone involved in Bitcoin, essentially, we made our own money. It's perfect money. It has nothing to do with the state. You've separated for the first time in history, state from money. It's never been done before, ever. And now it has been finished. It has been completed. It has been figured out, and it's been launched, and it's out there for 10, 11 years, and it's working. And the nation state, as we know it, is going to dissolve. Central banks are going to dissolve, and fiat money is going to go the way of all fiat money has gone over 300 years. Not a single fiat money, paper money scheme has lasted over the past 300 years. They've all gone to zero or lost 99% of their purchase power. The biggest bubble in the world by far is the bond bubble. So it's in a 300-year, it took 300 years for the bonds in the UK to get this extended and into a bubble. It took over 240 years for the American debt market to get into this bubble. It's so far in a bubble that's gone negative. Interest rates in the sovereign bond market are now actually negative. So that not even Bernie Madoff, got his Ponzi scheme to that level of extremity. So that is by far the biggest bubble in the world, is the U.S. bond market and the sovereign debt market. Then you have behind that, I would say, the fiat money currency. The U.S. dollar is in an enormous bubble. You've got still some property markets are in a huge bubble. And probably the one asset in the world now that's undervalued, that's not even very close to getting into a valuation that it should be commensurate with the rest of the markets, would be Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the cheapest asset in the world you can buy. As Paul Tudor Jones has said, it's the fastest horse in the race. Paul Tudor Jones doesn't have to say much to make a huge statement. He said that the Bitcoin price is mispriced. He said the Bitcoin price is, whenever he sees something as mispriced as Bitcoin, he gets excited to see that. And what he means by that is what I've just said, essentially, is that everything else pretty much is in a bubble. Bitcoin is one of the only assets probably that's not a bubble. It's the most undervalued asset probably in the world today. It's demonstrably, provably not a Ponzi scheme. As a matter of fact, it's a reverse Ponzi scheme. In a Ponzi scheme, the base of the Ponzi scheme has to constantly get wider and bigger. The new money has to keep coming in to pay the investors off who have gotten into the Ponzi scheme early. That's a Ponzi scheme, as Charles Ponzi created the Ponzi scheme with his scheme of, I believe it was stamps, and they had a stamp collecting Ponzi scheme, and that's where we get the term from. And we now also look at Bernie Madoff was running a bit of a Ponzi scheme in that he was paying off investor returns with the new money coming in. Now let's look at Bitcoin. Bitcoin is actually the opposite. Every 4 years, the amount of money that's mined on a daily basis shrinks by 50% in what's called the halving. So we started off with 50 coins per distribution on the mining output per 10 minutes. And then we had a halving down to 25, and then a halving down to 12 and a half, and a halving down to 6 1/4. So actually, it's a reverse Ponzi scheme. The amount of money that's entering the system is shrinking, not expanding. So that's a very simple point. And anyone who calls it a Ponzi scheme, A, doesn't know what a Ponzi scheme is, and B, has never looked at Bitcoin for more than 5 seconds, or just accepted like a Nouriel Roubini tweet as if that has a meaning, but he's never looked at it either. So that's demonstrably, provably wrong.
Okay.
So, I mean, it's just, if you know what 2 + 2 = 4, then you know that this is not a Ponzi scheme if you look at a definition of a Ponzi scheme and you look at the distribution of coins within Bitcoin. It's so simple that any 9-year-old would look at this for 5 minutes and tell you exactly the same thing. But again, we have a mainstream media that doesn't qualify to have the intelligence of a 9-year-old. They simply repeat propaganda points because they're propagandists. Tether is 7% or less of the market. It was big in 2017. That was a talking point from 2017. It was resurrected recently. I think Rubini likes to keep talking tether, tether, tether. Again, no, he has no understanding of this at all and has never done any research on it. He just farts into his Twitter account and expects everyone to think that his farts smell really good. But guess what, Nuriel? Your farts stink and your logic is broken, and you haven't even spent 3 minutes studying this and how NYU keeps you employed. As an NYU alumnus, I've sent a few letters to them saying he needs to be fired, gotten rid of immediately. He's a plague at NYU. He's embarrassing alumnus like myself at NYU with his utter contempt for civility and, well, maybe not civility, but intelligence. And it's gross. And he should be gotten rid of. I don't care if he's got tenure. So Tether is not a factor. Tether is not in play. It was brought about in 2017 as a way to trade in and out of Bitcoin into a US dollar surrogate. It's basically a money market. You know, money markets have a use. People trade in and out of a money market. If I have an account and full of stocks and I sell my stock and I go into a money market until I find a new stock. Same thing with a Tether or a stable coin or a US dollar type cryptocurrency. It's like a money market. And like in the money markets in 2008, remember, there was a threat that it would break the buck because money markets are not, exactly 100% a guaranteed piece of paper. Yeah, there's counterparty risk with basic money market account. Hello, if this is news to you, wake up. Your money market has counterparty risk. So does Tether. So does every security in the world. So does every exchange in the world. The only thing without counterparty risk is Bitcoin. Bitcoin has no counterparty risk. That's something else gold doesn't have. Gold has counterparty risk. Gold has verification because, first of all, there's nothing the government can do to stop Bitcoin. So there's no way to regulate Bitcoin. And that's what the governments are finding out. They would love to regulate it and they would love to stop it. But so far they've been unsuccessful because the computational power that runs Bitcoin, running at about 160 quintillion calculations per second, is beyond the reach of any government or any group of governments. So it's achieved escape velocity. Maybe 5 or 6 years ago, if governments really wanted to, they may have been able to thwart Bitcoin. But now it's too late. It's simply escape velocity has been achieved, and there's nothing any government can do. Number one. Number two, you've got people inside government that are now pro-Bitcoin. So you've got a senator from Wyoming, for example, who is absolutely pro-Bitcoin, who's lobbying for Bitcoin, who wants to change the state of Wyoming to be a Bitcoin state. They've got a Bitcoin bank, and they want to compete with Delaware. They want to compete with other states. So you've got on the senatorial level, Bitcoin is making inroads. You've got people in Congress, in the Senate, who own Bitcoin, who are not going to fight Bitcoin because they would benefit by owning Bitcoin. They love Bitcoin. It's a fifth column working inside the government. So they're not motivated to stop Bitcoin.